Good evening. Concerning this year, Pesach, we have a unique schedule that brought up a great historical debate in Gemara. And that is the fact that the 14th day of Nisan, Erev Pesach, comes out on Shabbos. Usually the day before Pesach is during one of the days of the week. This year, in a more seldom calendar pattern, Erev Pesach, Yudalad Nisan is Chol b'Shabbos. And the great question that came up in Jewish history was, are we obligated, are we permitted to offer the Passover sacrifice, the special korbanPesah that had to be brought each year, Erev Pesach in the afternoon? Can we bring it also on Erev Pesach if it's Shabbos? Ordinarily, we know Erev Pesach in the afternoon, there was an obligation on every Jew to be part of a korbanPesach, of a Passover sacrifice, either a lamb, a sheep, or a goat. Every Jew had to become a subscriber to a korbanPesach. Usually it could be one family joined together to purchase and offer a Passover offering in the Beis Hamikdash in Yerushalayim. If the family wasn't large enough to eat an entire sheep or an entire goat, other families or other individuals can join this family. But as the Mishnah says, we say it in the morning, the korbanPesach is eaten only for its subscribers, people who subscribe to this korban. And then hundreds of thousands of Jews would come Erev Pesach in the afternoon to the Beis Hamikdash to sacrifice their korbanPesach together as a community. And then they would bring home their korbanPesach, and at night, the night of Pesach, they celebrated the Seder. And of course the highlight of the Seder in the time of the Beis Hamikdash was V'achlu as habasar ba'layla hazet tzli eish al matzos u'merorim yechlu, as the pasuk says in Parshas Bo. During the Seder they would barbecue the meat of the korbanPesach. As the Torah says, it's forbidden to cook it, it's forbidden to fry it, it's even forbidden to pot roast it. It had to be barbecued directly on the fire. They would put it into a spit, they would put a spit into the korbanPesach and roast it, barbecue it on the fire, and then it was eaten at the Seder through every Jewish family in Yerushalayim on the night of Pesach. This is what happened every single year. The question arose, what about if Erev Pesach was on Shabbos? Slaughtering an animal is one of the labors, one of the malachos that is forbidden on Shabbos. Can they bring the korbanPesach on Shabbos? Eating it and roasting it wouldn't be a problem. Roasting it on fire, barbecuing it, because that's done mitzvah Shabbos. That would be on Saturday night after nightfall when we perform the Seder. But the slaughtering of the korban has to be during the afternoon hours, before sunset. And this is Shabbos. So what's the halacha about Erev Pesach shechol b'Shabbos? So the Gemara in Masechta Pesachim, Daf Samach Vav Amud Aleph, tells the famous story, Tanu Rabbanon, halacha zu nisalma mibnei Pseira. This halacha, this discussion, this law, was concealed from the children of Pseira. The children of Pesach, as Rashi explains there in Pesachim, they were the Nesiim. They were the leaders of the Sanhedrin, of the Jewish Supreme Court, that was responsible for all major halachic decisions in Jewish life at the time. The Sanhedrin was the group of 71 people, 71 of the most brilliant, elevated, respected members of the Jewish people who represented the body of law, Torah Shebaal Peh, the tradition of Judaism. And the Sanhedrin had a Nasi, had a leader. The 71 members of the Sanhedrin had a Nasi, had a leader. The leader then was somebody from the family of Pseira. So there were the Bnei Pseira, the children of Pseira, who were part of the Sanhedrin. And they did not know the answer to this question. Do we bring a korban on Erev Pesach shechol b'Shabbos? So they asked, is there anybody who knows? Is there anybody who has knowledge about this? So they told the Bnei Pseira, Adam Echad, there's one person, Sha'ala mi Bavel, he came from Babylonia, he ascended from Babylonia. V'Hillel habavli shma, his name is Hillel. Sheshimesh negdele ador shmaya v'avtalyan. He had the merit to serve the two giants of the generation, Shmaya and Avtalion. He knows whether the Passover offering can override the prohibitions of labor on Shabbos. So they called Hillel Abavli, and they asked him the question, does the korbanPesah override Shabbos? What did Hillel tell them? He said, V'chi Pesach echad yesh lanu b'shana shedoiches HaShabbos. Haloi harbe yoser mimasayim psachim yesh lanu b'shana shedoiches HaShabbos. You're asking me if the korbanPesach overrides Shabbos? Do we have one instance of one korbanPesach overriding Shabbos? We have throughout the year more than 200 psachim that override Shabbos. Referring to, where do we have 200 psachim? Referring to the fact, as Rashi explains, there are 50 Shabbosim in the year. Each Shabbos they offered a korban tamid, a lamb in the morning and a lamb at dusk, like every day of the week. Shabbos as well, 7 days a week, a lamb in the morning and a lamb at dusk in the afternoon. It's called the korban tamid, the sakevas echad b'boker, sakevas hasheni ben arbayim. In addition to that, every Shabbos there was a korban musaf, an additional offering specially for Shabbos. U'b'yoyim HaShabbos shnei chvasim b'nei shana tamim. Each Shabbos 2 lambs, which means each Shabbos there were 4 offerings, regular communal offerings, 2 korbanos tmidim and 2 lambs for the korban musaf. 50 Shabbosim a year, it's 200, 4 times 50. So Hillel says, 1 Pesach a year that's Doiche Shabbos. There are 200 Pesachim a year that are Doiche Shabbos. 200 times a year the korbanPesach is Doiche Shabbos. Each Shabbos we sacrifice 4 offerings, violating the laws of Shabbos. In other words, 200 Pesachim are Doiche Shabbos. Why is Hillel calling them Pesachim? They're not Pesachim, they're not Passover offerings, they're Tamid offerings or Musaf offerings. So what he means, obviously, Rashi explains, because Pesach is a communal offering, it's brought by the community, the whole community had to bring it. The korban tamid and the korban musaf every Shabbos was also a korban sibur. It was a communal offering. And thus Hillel says, just like every Shabbos we bring these 4 offerings, notwithstanding the fact that it's Shabbos, Erev Pesach, Shechol b'Shabbos, we can also bring an offering. So they asked him, how do you know to compare? So he told them that there's a Gzeirah Shava, which means there's the word b'mayadoi by korban tamid, there's the word mayadoi by korbanPesach, so we compare the two, and we derive Pesach from tamid, you can do it on Shabbos. And what happened at this moment was, the Bnei Pseira stepped down, and they appointed Hillel as the Nasi, as the leader of the Sanhedrin of the Jewish people. The Gemara continues that all day he was expounding on Hilchas Pesach. The Gemara continues this story, it's a long story, that Hillel also tried to prove it to them through a Kal V'chomer, through another logical proof, which they refuted, they didn't accept. In Yerushalmi, in Masechta Pesachim, the story is also recorded, and there is a slight different version. Hillel told the Bnei Pseira clearly, since Tamid is a korban sibur, Pesach is a korban sibur, they're both communal offerings, they're brought by the whole community. So just like the korban sibur of Tamid overrides Shabbos, the korban sibur of Pesach overrides Shabbos. And the Yerushalmi continues, they still would not accept all of his proofs, not his Kal V'chomer, and not his Gzeirah Shava, and not his other proofs, until he told them, this is what I heard from Shmaya and Avtalion, this is what Shmaya and Avtalion said, and then they accepted it. Here, we need to understand what was the debate between Hillel and the Bnei Pesach. Why is it that they couldn't come up with the logical arguments that Hillel came up with, proving that the korbanPesah overrides Shabbos, and they remained in limbo, ignorant of what to do, until Hillel came and told them what to do? So you may say, Hillel had a Gzeir Shava, b'mayadai, b'mayadai. They did not know this Gzeir Shava. Gzeir Shava is usually something you receive in tradition from your Rebbes. But we see clearly in Bavli that even the Kal V'chomer that Hillel presented, they would not accept. So Hillel had a logical proof, and they refuted that proof. Hillel said, for not bringing the korban tamid, there's no death penalty. There's no kares. For not offering the korbanPesah, there is kares. If this overrides Shabbos, for sure this overrides Shabbos. So they told him, no, this is tadir, this is she'enei tadir. This is consistent, it's every week, this is not every week. But Hillel still said the Kal V'chomer. In other words, there was an underlying logic why he saw it one way, and they saw it another way. Clearly in Yerushalmi, they wouldn't accept anything. They wouldn't even accept the Gzeir Shava until he told them Shmaya Naftalion said it, and they felt inferior intellectually and spiritually to Shmaya Naftalion. They accepted it. What was the logic behind their argument? What was their perspective? What was Hillel's perspective? Now there's a Mishnah in Tmurah. The Mishnah in the beginning of the second Perek of Tmurah brings an argument between Reb Meir and Tanakama. Reb Meir believes that the principle that guides us to know whether a korban overrides Shabbos or not is if Zmanei Kavua. If there's a korban that has a fixed time, it overrides Shabbos. If it doesn't have a fixed time, it doesn't override Shabbos. According to the Meir, it makes no difference whether it's a communal offering or an individual offering. The primary element is time. Does it have a permanent time or not? Tanakama disagrees with the Meir. He holds that the issue is korban sibur or korban yachid. If it's a communal offering, it overrides Shabbos. If it's an individual offering, it doesn't override Shabbos. There are two types of korbanos. There's a korban that the community brings, there's a korban that the individual brings. For example, if a Jew sinned certain sins, he had to bring an offering. This was an individual offering. He went and with his own money or with her own money, they purchased an offering and they brought it to the Beis HaMikdash. And there were many such types of offerings that the individual offers from his or her money. Many of the offerings, the individual who brought it had a chance to eat the korban, to benefit from it, to enjoy it, and so forth. And then there were korbanos that were brought on behalf of the community. For example, the daily tamid, the lamb in the morning, the lamb in the evening. The korban musaf. This was not taken from any individual's money. This was taken from the money in the Beis HaMikdash that was donated from the Machzas HaShekel. Every Jew used to donate a particular amount of money each year. And this created the kuppah, the safe, the deposit. There was a lot of money in the Beis HaMikdash, and this they used to use each day to purchase offerings that was offered on behalf of the whole community. This is called a korban sibur. It's not a korban yachid. Tanakama holds this is the primary factor. Korban sibur is doiche Shabbos. Korban yachid is not doiche Shabbos. According to the Meir, there would be no question about the korbanPesah. The korbanPesah has a fixed time. Yudalit and there's no question. The reason why the Bnei Pesach had a question was because they held like Tanakama, that the issue is not Zman, whether it has a fixed time or not. The primary issue is if it's a korban sibur or a korban yachid, apparently. According to Reb Meir, it's not a question. According to Tanakama, it's a question. This explains beautifully the Yerushalmi. What was Hillel's argument to them? Tamid is a korban sibur and Pesach is a korban sibur. So it has to be doiche Shabbos. Now we understand the words, because according to Tanakama, this is the issue. whether it's a korban yachid or a korban sibur. This explains also why Hillel spoke to them in Pesachim and Gemara Bavli in this humorous fashion. He tells them there's one Pesach a year, there's 200 Pesachim a year. Why did he express himself this way? He could have said there's 200 times a year that a korban is Doicher Shabbos. Why does he call the regular Shabbos offering a Pesach? It's not Pesach. It could be Sukkot, it could be Shavuos, it could be the Shoshana, it could be Stama Shabbos. Why does he call it Pesachim? He wants to bring out that there's a common denominator between the korban Pesach and the korban Tamid. What's the common denominator? The common denominator is it's a korban sibur, it's a community offering. Yet we have to state, even according to Tanakama, it's not enough that it's a korban sibur. It also has to have a permanent time. That's why there is a korban. The par helam davar shel tzibur. It doesn't override Shabbos, it's a korban sibur, but it doesn't have a fixed time. According to this Yesod, we must conclude that this perhaps is the argument between Hillel and Bnei Pesach. Whether korban Pesach is a korban yachid, or korban Pesach is a korban sibur. But what would the argument be? Why is there such an argument? Let's now take this a step further. In Sifri, in Parshas Ba'aloischa, the pasuk v'yasu b'nei Yisrael sa'pesach b'mayadai, there's an argument between Rabbi Yoshia and Rabbi Yonasan. What's the argument? Same question. Is the korban Pesach doiche Shabbos or not? Rabbi Yoshia, just like Hillel, believes that the word b'mayadai, stated in both cases, Tamid and Pesach, teaches us that the korban Pesach overrides Shabbos. Rabbi Yonasan says no. From this word, you still have no lesson that the korban Pesach overrides Shabbos. Mimashma hazeh adayin lo yishemanu. He holds like the Bnei Pesach. What's the argument between Rabbi Yosher and Rabbi Yonasan? Clearly, Rabbi Yonasan rejects the Gzeirah Shava. It says b'mayadai. I cannot use it to compare Pesach to Tamid. Rabbi Yoshia says I can. Why? What's the logic? Throughout the month of Nisan Tovshin Lamed Zay in 1977, the Rebbe discussed this Gemara in Pesachim at length. At the Farbrengen of Yud Aleph Nisan, at the Farbrengen of Achron Shal Pesach, and at the Farbrengen at the gathering of the Shabbos afterwards, Parshas Shmini. And during each of these three Farbrengens, he developed the sugya more and more detail. And I will share with you this evening one point of the Rebbe's Sikha, of the Rebbe's explanation, then in that month of Nisan 77, when the calendar was similar to this year, Tavshin Samaches, Erev Pesach Shechal B'Shabbos. The Rebbe said that if you examine the perspectives of Rabbi Yonasan and Rabbi Yoshi and all of Gemara, you will come to discover that there is a theme that pervades the perspective of Rabbi Yonasan as well as the Weltanschauung of Rabbi Yoshia, a theme that pervades many arguments and disputations between them and halacha. And the theme revolves around the following question. When the individual and the collective community clash with each other, which one must prevail? As we know, this was one of the greatest questions in the political structures of society from the days of yore. When humanity attempted to figure out how do we structure government, how do we create a political structure that is best for the people, that is best for society. Some perspectives chose the tzibur over the yachid. They felt the collective must prevail. The individual must forfeit many of his rights for the sake of society, for the sake of the collective body. Other perspectives, on the contrary, chose to elevate the status and the value of the individual. Everybody understands that for the sake of a government and a political structure to happen, the individual must forfeit some of his rights for the sake of the collective. Even in America, a capitalistic and democratic society, we pay taxes. And other rights we forego for the sake of the whole to be able to pay for the expenses of an army and a government, etc., etc. Yet the question is, what is the core of the society? Is it based on the tzibur or is it based on the yachid? There are systems based on dictatorship, socialism, communism, the monarchy, and then of course systems like capitalism, democracy where the individual prevails. This is not a simple debate. It's a debate that's been going on for thousands of years. What is better for society? What is better for the people? And all political thought and various philosophies and perspectives over the generations went back and forth. The yachid or the tzibur or the yachid. And within each perspective itself there are many categories. There were those who took it to a radical extreme and believed that it's all about the collective. The yachid has no rights. He or she is only a pawn in society, in the collective identity of society. And others who took it radically the other way. Individual worship to an extreme. In Yiddishkeit, we have much discussion about the importance of the tzibur, of the collective whole, but also of the value of the individual. So Rabbi Yonasan and Rabbi Yoshia have this argument. When the two come together, which one is more significant? Rabbi Yoshia, if he can opt, if he sees something and he can turn it into a tzibur, he opts for the tzibur. Rabbi Yonasan tries to individualize. A few examples. There's an argument between Rabbi Yoshia and Rabbi Yonasan in Baba Metzia. Baba Metzia Daf Nandalad Amid Aleph. There are some cases where the Torah demands from us to pay compensation and add a fifth. You eat truma by mistake, inadvertently. You eat truma. You're not a kohen, and you eat the kohen's truma. You can't only pay him back the truma. You have to add a fifth. You use something that belongs to hektish by mistake, me'ila behektish. You have to pay back hektish for what you used and add a fifth. This fifth, is it a chaimish milgav or a chaimish milbar? A chaimish from the inside or a fifth from the outside? Rabbi Yoshia believes that you add a fifth to the entire sum of money, to the point that the principal and the fifth together make up 5 equal pieces. So for example, if the truma that you ate was worth $100, so you add $25, you pay $125. That way you add a fifth portion to the principal, so it's 25, 25, 25, 25, 25. 5 pieces of 25. So between the principal and the fifth, you have 5 equal pieces. Rabbi Yonasan says, no, chaimish milgav, a chaimish from the inside. You divide the principal into 5, and you have to pay a fifth, which means $120, not $125. What's the argument? What's the logic behind the argument? The logic behind the argument is, when you gaze at the principal and the fifth, you can look at it in 2 ways. You can synchronize it, you can connect it, you can create a community from it, or you can divide it, individualize it. On one hand, this is the principal, and this is only an addition, it's a penalty. On the other hand, they're both being paid by the same person for the same act. Whenever Rabbi Yoshia has a chance to integrate details, to bring individuals together to create a collective unit out of diverse details, he will jump on it. Thus, he creates an integration between the principle and the penalty, it all makes up one unit of 5. One unit that can be divided equally in 5. Rabbi Yonasan, whenever he has a choice, he attempts to individualize. He attempts to focus and bring out the uniqueness of the individual, the status of the individual, hence, he creates a fragmentation. There are 2 things. There is the principal and there's the fifth. The principal is $100. The fifth is $20. It's a fifth from it. Another example. We have an argument between them in Sanhedrin, Daf Samach Vav Amud Aleph. The Torah ascribes a very severe penalty to somebody who curses his father and his mother. So the question is, it says, Mekalel Aviv, you curse your father and your mother. The question is, do you have to curse both of them or also one individual? It says you curse your father and your mother. Does it mean either or does it mean both of them? Rabbi Yoshia says that our thought is that it includes both. When you curse your father and your mother, that's when you get the penalty. And hence the Torah has to write a special pasuk to teach us otherwise. Rabbi Yonason says no. There's no necessity to look that way. When it says Mekalel Avivim, it means either your father or your mother. What's the argument between them? What's the logic? Here again, when you look at a father and a mother, you can see them as a single unit, as the progenitors of this child, or you can see them as individual people. Even as progenitors of this child, this is the father and this is the mother. Rabbi Yoshia, who attempts to synchronize, to turn individuals into a collective unit, who focuses on the primacy of society, of the collective, of the tzibur, Mekalel Avivim means the unit, the father and the mother, as a unit. When you curse your source includes a father and a mother. Rabbi Yonason, who attempts to highlight the individual, Aviv v'ima, he focuses on the individual father, the individual mother. Hence, he is believed that the pasuk initially should be understood as either or. You assume Aviv is one element and Ima is another element. He doesn't focus on the fact that they're really one element. There's a tzibur here as the source, and hence the curse must apply to both. He focuses on the individual. Another example, more abstract. There is the case in Chumash and Shoftim, if you find a slain victim and nobody knows who killed him, so the elders of the closest city have to come and offer a calf and do a whole ritual to ask atonement for the death of this slain victim who we don't know who murdered. And the Torah says that it has to be done in a place, on soil, a soil that would not be worked or sowed. There was no planting, there was no sowing, there was no plowing over there. So Rabbi Yoshia says the pasuk means in the past. Rabbi Yonason says it's only for the future. The Torah says in the future, on this soil where you're offering the Eglah Arufah, don't plant. Rabbi Yoshia says it means you never planted there. What's the argument? For the future, the Gemara says they both hold you're not allowed to plant. The question is on the past. Rabbi Yoshia says even in the past it has to be soil that was unworked. Rabbi Yonason says no, the past is fine, the main thing is the future. What's the argument? When you study time, and it's one of the most complicated elements of study or objects of study because it's so abstract, you can describe time in two ways. You can individualize time, there's the past, there's the present and the future. Or you can collectivize time. You can synchronize time. There's one unit of time, indivisible, which encompasses past, present, and future. Rabbi Yoshia, when he has a choice, he goes to the collective. So he sees time as one unit. Rabbi Yonason, when he has a choice, he sees time as diverse individual units. So in Rabbi Yoshia's world, you don't divide the past and the future, unless the Torah says clearly to. So Ashalaya Avid by Velayizareh includes both, according to the Rabbi Yonason, and includes only the future. Let's give another example. Pesach Yuma Daf Zayin. The Torah says that on Yom Kippur v'lakach midam asar midam apar, you take from the blood of the goat and the blood of the ox, and you sprinkle it on the corners of the Mizbeach. Rabbi Yoshia says, you mix the two bloods and you sprinkle them together on the Mizbeach. Rabbi Yonason says, no. The Torah says, take from this and take from this, but you sprinkle from this one independently and from this one independently. Here again, Rabbi Yoshia creates a community from the blood. Rabbi Yonasan individualizes the blood. And there are many more examples, many more, that the Rebbe brings in the Sikha, published later in Lekutei Sichos Chelik Yud Ches Parshas Ba'aloischa. According to this, the Rebbe says, we will now understand their argument about korbanPesah. Is korbanPesah an individual offering or is it a community offering? The answer is it's the only offering that has both properties. On one hand, it's an individual offering. Everybody had to pay for it from their own money. There were individual subscribers to each korbanPesah. Every individual who offered it ate it by himself. It wasn't eaten by the kohanim. It wasn't consumed on the altar. It wasn't eaten by the representatives of the community in the Beis HaMikdash. It was eaten by individuals. At their seder, at their home, at their meal. These are all properties of a korban yachid. On the other hand, it wasn't really a korban yachid. It had to be brought together with other Jews. V'shachatu oisei kol kahal adas Yisrael hapesach nishchat begimel kitois. You couldn't go to the Beis HaMikdash on your own and offer it. You had to offer your korban Pesach with thousands, hundreds and thousands of other Jews together. Or as the Gemara puts it, Asi b'knufya, they came as a group. So it had both properties of the yachid and properties of the tzibur. The question is, which prevails? Rabbi Yoshia says the tzibur prevails. It's a tzibur. If you can look at the community element, that's what prevails. So it's Doicha Shabbos. Rabbi Yonasan says, no, it's a korban yachid. It's not Doicha Shabbos. The Bnei Pseira had the shita also, it's a yachid. Hillel had the shita, it's a tzibur. Thus his logic said it's Doicha Shabbos. They said it's not Doicha Shabbos. If this is the case, Zog the Rebbe, let's go to Pirkei Avos, the first perek of Pirkei Avos, which we read right after Pesach. What does Hillel say? Imein ani li mili, chshani li atzmi mani, v'im lo yachshav emasai. If I am not for myself, who will be for me? But if I am only for myself, what am I? And if not now, when? In these words, the Rebbe says we have embedded the perspective of Hillel about korbanPesah. On one hand, imein ani li mili. If I am not for myself, who will be for me? The korbanPesach will not be offered by the community on your behalf. You must take your money and buy your sheep and subscribe to your korban and bring it to Yerushalayim and make sure it's sacrificed and take it home and barbecue it and eat it. Imein ani li, if I am not for myself, mili, it's a yachid, it's a korban yachid. On the other hand, ucheshani li atzmi, if I'm only for myself, ma'ani, what am I? If it's only about me, I can't bring a korbanPesach. V'shachatu oisei kol kahal adas Yisrael. I need the congregation, I need the community. If I'm only for myself, what am I? The Pesach has to come b'tzibur. The whole community brings a korbanPesach together. So it's not only a korban yachid, imein ani li mili, it's also a korban tzibur, chshani la'atzmi mani. And he continues, v'im lo yachshav, and if not now, emasai, when? It's a korban that's manei kavua, it has a permanent time. So it's a korban yachid, but it's also a korban tzibur, and it's manei kavua. Doicha Shabbos. As we explained before, that even according to Tanakama, it's not enough that it's a korban tzibur, it must be zmanei kavua. That's why a par helam davar shel tzibur is not doicha Shabbos, because it's not zmanei kavua. Im lo yachshav emasa, you can't bring the Pesach tomorrow. After tomorrow, zmanei kavua, this is the time. So according to Hillel, it's doicha Shabbos. Now the question we have to ask is, why does the korbanPesach have these two paradoxical properties? Why can't it be either a yachid or a tzibur? Why this complication that creates this dispute between Rabbi Yoshia and Rabbi Yonasan, between Hillel and Bnei Pseira? Zog the Rebbe, because the korbanPesach, more than any other offering, embodied within itself the birth of Klal Yisrael. The korbanPesach was brought Erev Pesach as a celebration of the Seder. What is the celebration? It's the celebration of the Exodus of Egypt. It wasn't only redemption from slavery. It was the moment when the Jewish people were forged into a people. They were liberated from their slavery and they were born Pesach is the birth of our people. It's the birth of Klal Yisrael. So this korban is not just any korban, as great as it may be. It's the korban that captures the very genesis of the identity of Klal Yisrael. And this is the question: what is Jewish identity based on? What is Klal Yisrael based on? What does it mean to be a Jew, to be a member of the Jewish people? Is it about the tzibur or is it about the yachid? Does being a Jew mean that you're part of a body, of a collective society we call Klal Yisrael? Your value and your significance constitutes of the fact that you are a component. You are a part of the larger community of Klal Yisrael. You make up, together with many other individuals, Klal Yisrael. Or being a Jew, the value of being a Jew is about the individual. You as an individual have enormous significance. You as an individual have a unique sensitivity, are part of an individual covenant. Jewishness is about you as a person, your own characteristics, your uniqueness, or perhaps it's about the tzibur. And of course, each one has many categories. This is not a simple question of either or. When we discuss being part of a tzibur, what does that mean? Does it mean that you have no value of your own, only that you're part of the tzibur? If you fit in, great. If you don't fit in, you're valueless. Does it mean that you have individual value as long as you're part of the tzibur? In other words, your individual value is the fact that you contribute something to the tzibur. Or is it about really you as an individual? This is a great debate and a great question. Comes the Torah and says that the first korban was neither. It was not a yachid, it was not a tzibur. It had to combine both components. Because the experience of Jewishness, the experience of Klal Yisrael, puts emphasis on both components in a very powerful way. Yes, the tzibur is significant, the tzibur is important. Al tifresh min tzibur. We are all part of an individual people, one collective body that includes all the Jews. But the same Yiddishkeit also focuses on the radical and absolute value of the individual as an individual. To the extent that there is a radical halacha. As the Rambam puts it in Hilchos Yesodei HaTorah in the 5th chapter. If a group, an army of Gentiles comes to a city and they tell the Jews, give us one Jew and we will murder him. If not, we declare war and we will attempt to murder all of you. What is the halacha? Logically, they're asking for one person, an innocent person. They don't specify a name. They're not pursuing a criminal. They want one Jew. Give us up one Jew and you'll all be safe. If you don't give up one Jew, we kill all of you. No, you might say, he's an innocent Jew, she's an innocent Jew. So they'll be the scapegoat. They'll be murdered. We'll all be saved. Does it make sense? You say no, so now you'll have thousands of people killed. That person may be saved, but you'll have thousands of people killed. If you don't win the war, maybe everybody will be killed, including him. The halacha is, Yehargu kulam val yimsuru am nefesh achas miYisrael. Let them all die, they're not allowed to give one soul. Why? Because the individual life has absolute, unequivocal, endless value. It's not only a means for an end. Your life is valuable because you make up society. Your life is valuable because you contribute something to society. Your life is valuable as an individual life. Life has an end in and of itself. There's no statistics, there's no politics with life, there's no playing games with life. The Yachid. So the korbanPesah at our birth, we focus both on the Yachid and on the Tzibur. Or as Hillel put it, Imein anili mili, if I am not for myself, who will be for me? On the other hand, Uchshani liyatzmi ma'ani. If I am only for myself, if there is nothing but me, then ma'ani, what am I? That self is reduced to insignificance. It becomes very, very small. The self must appreciate the fact that it ought to choose to embrace the greater picture. It chooses to become one with the tzibur, to become one with the community, not in a way that abnegates and nullifies and crushes the self, but on the contrary, you start with imein anili mili, and then the self appreciates its need to expand its horizons and expand its consciousness. That it's also part of a greater picture, part of a greater society, part of a greater symphony. Ve'im lo yachshav emasai. Which means also in every person's life, one ought not to say, there's a big community, there's a big society, they will work it out. Imeina nili mili. I must also focus what is my individual calling and what is my individual responsibility. On the other hand, I ought not to say, Ucheshani liyatzmi, there's only me. My way or the highway. Cheshani liyatzmi mani. Yes, I must know and appreciate my uniqueness and my value and my contribution, but I must recognize that for a symphony to be created, we need diversity, we need otherness. And one ought not to postpone any of these two components, because v'im lo yachshav, if not now, amos I when. Have a wonderful evening. On a kosher and on a freilichen Pesach.